I started my business with nothing but a laptop, an idea, and a fierce determination to make it work. It all began about 3 years ago when I realized I was sick of the corporate grind. I had spent a decade working in the marketing department of a large tech company. On paper, it was the dream job, decent pay, solid benefits, opportunities to travel, and, on the surface, the kind of job that people looked up to. But every day felt the same. I was stuck in the same routine, attending endless meetings that seemed to go nowhere, and my personal goals were slowly being buried under the weight of office politics and bureaucracy. One day, I was sitting in a meeting, listening to the usual talk about synergy and quarterly targets when it hit me. I wasn't learning anything new anymore. The company I worked for had plateaued. It had become a massive machine that no longer took risks, no longer cared about innovation. All it cared about was hitting numbers for shareholders. That's when I knew I had to leave. I had no clear idea of what I wanted to do next. All I knew was that I wanted freedom. Freedom from the grind, from the endless red tape, and from the feeling that my efforts were being wasted. I spent the next couple of months reading books about entrepreneurship, talking to anyone who'd listen about starting a business, and brainstorming ideas. But nothing really clicked until one evening when I was at a party and had a conversation with an old friend from college who had recently started his own company. He was running a small e-commerce store, selling handmade, sustainable products. What struck me about him was his passion. He wasn't working for the money. He was working because he loved what he did, and it showed. He told me that he started out with just a few $100s, working out of his garage, selling products on Etsy. He was now making 6 figures a year and had turned his small side hustle into a thriving business. His story ignited something in me. Maybe I didn't have to invent some groundbreaking tech product or come up with a world-changing app. Maybe all I needed was an idea that aligned with my values and had the potential to grow. I spent the next several weeks doing research. I looked into various industries, trends, and consumer needs. It became clear that sustainability was a major trend. People were becoming more aware of the impact their purchases had on the environment. The rise of eco-friendly, ethical consumerism was undeniable. That's when I had my aha moment. What if I could create a brand that focused on providing sustainable, eco-friendly alternatives to everyday products? Something simple, practical, and aligned with the growing environmental movement. I started small. I built a website, designed a logo, and began reaching out to suppliers who specialized in sustainable materials. It wasn't glamorous. I spent hours every day trying to figure out how to make a simple product line and launch it with minimal investment. There were a lot of failures along the way, websites that crashed, orders that went wrong, suppliers that didn't deliver on time. But I kept pushing. Every failure was a lesson learned, and I made sure to learn from every single mistake. The first product I launched was a set of reusable, eco-friendly grocery bags. I thought it was something everyone could use, and it was a small enough item that I could afford to produce in small batches. I listed the bags on my website, set up social media accounts, and started creating content about sustainability. The first few weeks were slow. I had a handful of visitors, but no one was really buying. I felt like I was shouting into the void, and it was incredibly frustrating. I began experimenting with different marketing strategies. I started running targeted ads on Instagram and Facebook, hoping to reach people who were interested in eco-friendly products. I also reached out to influencers in the sustainability space, offering them free products in exchange for reviews. Slowly but surely, things started to pick up. The first sale came about a month after launching, and it felt like a huge win. It wasn't much, just a single order for 2 bags, but it was proof that there was a market for what I was offering. After that, things started snowballing. Word of mouth spread. More people began sharing my product on social media. I reinvested every penny I made back into the business, buying more inventory, paying for better ads, and improving the website. I expanded my product line to include other eco-friendly alternatives like bamboo toothbrushes, reusable straws, and compostable phone cases. Each product I launched was met with more enthusiasm than the last. At one point, I realized that I was spending more time running my business than I was at my day job. The moment I took that leap and went full-time into entrepreneurship was terrifying, but it felt right. I had reached a point where I was making enough money to sustain myself, and I had the confidence that I could continue to grow my business. Looking back, there were countless challenges I faced: supply chain issues, customer complaints, shipping delays, but the rewards far outweighed the difficulties. My revenue continued to grow year after year, and eventually, I hired my first employee to help manage customer service and inventory. I even moved my operation out of my living room and into a small warehouse. It felt surreal. But the real turning point came when I decided to pivot. I had built a successful business, but it was time for something bigger. I wanted to scale, and I realized that I could do so by creating a subscription model. Customers would sign up to receive eco-friendly products on a regular basis, things like cleaning supplies, food storage options, or personal care products, all delivered to their doorsteps. It took months of planning and logistics, but when I launched the subscription service, it blew up. It became the most successful part of my business. The recurring revenue model gave me the stability I needed to grow even more. Today, my business is a thriving enterprise, and it's everything I hoped it would be and more. I'm not just selling products. I'm helping people make more sustainable choices in their daily lives. My mission has expanded beyond profit. It's about creating a positive impact on the world. I'm proud of what I've built, but I also know it wouldn't have happened without the hard work, sacrifices, and lessons learned along the way. I think one of the biggest things I've learned through this whole journey is that entrepreneurship isn't about having a big idea right from the start. It's about having the drive to get started, the resilience to keep going, and the willingness to learn from your mistakes. No one succeeds overnight, but with persistence, passion, and a willingness to adapt, you can build something that lasts. Looking back, I realized that the hardest part wasn't launching the business or even scaling it. The hardest part was the leap, the decision to step away from a stable job and take the risk of going all in on something uncertain. But it's that very risk that has made all the difference. If you're thinking about starting your own business, take the leap. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. You won't regret it. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. This is the story of how I went from being a broke college dropout to running a successful tech startup. It's a long journey with plenty of failures, lessons, and hard work. If you're reading this and are in a tough spot, just know that perseverance can get you to places you never imagined. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest. My parents were hardworking people, but we never had much. My mom was a nurse, and my dad worked at a factory. Money was always tight, but they did their best to make sure I had what I needed. I never really understood what wealth was until I went to college. My first taste of life outside my hometown was a wake-up call. Everyone around me seemed to have it all together. They had money, connections, and all these fancy gadgets. I, on the other hand, barely knew how to pay for my textbooks. I enrolled in a local university with plans to major in engineering. I was decent at math in high school, and I thought engineering was the safest route to a stable career. But after a year of being in classes I didn't really care about, I started to question whether this was the path I wanted to take. To make matters worse, I found myself buried in student loan debt, living off ramen noodles, and working a part-time job at a coffee shop just to stay afloat. One night, after a particularly grueling shift, I found myself sitting in my tiny apartment scrolling through my phone. I came across an article about a young entrepreneur who had dropped out of college to start his own tech company. He was now worth millions. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Here I was, struggling to make ends meet, and this guy had taken a risk and turned it into a fortune. I thought, what if I could do that too? I didn't have much experience with technology or business, but I had always been fascinated by the potential of the internet. I had a natural curiosity about how things worked and spent hours reading about programming, startups, and Silicon Valley. The more I read, the more I felt like I was in the wrong place. I wasn't passionate about engineering. I didn't care about designing bridges or buildings. But tech? That felt exciting. The idea of creating something from nothing, solving problems, and impacting people's lives was incredibly appealing to me. So, after a lot of soul-searching and some heated discussions with my parents, I made the decision to drop out of college. I'll never forget the look on my mom's face when I told her. She was supportive, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I didn't have a clear plan, and I wasn't exactly rolling in cash. But I was determined. I felt like this was my shot at something bigger than anything I could do with a degree. I moved to a nearby city with a small tech scene. I didn't have any connections, but I figured the best way to learn was to surround myself with people who knew more than I did. I got a job as an intern at a small startup. The pay was low, and I still had to take up side gigs to make ends meet, but I was learning. I was in the trenches, working on everything from coding to customer support. I soaked up every bit of information I could, and the more I worked, the more I realized that I wanted to build my own company. One day, after working at the startup for about 6 months, I had an idea. I noticed a gap in the market. There were a lot of apps out there for business owners, but none of them offered a simple way to manage their inventory, sales, and customer relationships in one place. It was all over the place, multiple subscriptions, clunky software, and a whole lot of inefficiency. I saw an opportunity to create something that could bring all of these functions together into a single, user-friendly platform. I spent the next few months working on a prototype. I didn't have much money, so I worked out of my apartment and used open-source tools to build the first version of my app. I would wake up early, work all day, and spend my nights coding. I barely slept, and I hardly saw my friends. It was exhausting, but I was driven. I had this vision in my head, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. After months of tweaking and refining the app, I had something I was proud of. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Now came the hard part, getting people to use it. I didn't have any money for marketing, and I didn't have a big network to tap into. So, I did what I could. I went to local meetups, posted in online forums, and reached out to small business owners who might benefit from the tool. It wasn't glamorous. Most people didn't respond, but a few did. I spent hours on the phone, explaining the app and offering free trials. Slowly but surely, I started to get a handful of users. It wasn't a breakout success overnight, but the feedback I received was invaluable. People were excited about the idea, but they had suggestions for how to make the app better. I listened to every bit of feedback I could, and I used it to improve the product. Over time, the app gained traction, and word started to spread. I got my first paying customer 6 months into the journey. That was a huge milestone for me. I remember celebrating with a cold beer and calling my parents to tell them I had made my first sale. It wasn't a lot of money, but it felt like validation. As the business grew, I started to hire a small team. I brought on a couple of developers, a designer, and a marketing person. We worked out of a tiny office with a few desks and an old coffee machine. The early days were tough. We struggled with cash flow, bugs in the software, and long hours. But I had the belief that if we kept pushing forward, we would make it. Fast forward to today, and my company is doing well. We've expanded our customer base and raised some venture capital to help us scale. We've got a solid product, a dedicated team, and a growing list of satisfied clients. I still can't believe how far we've come. There are days when I feel like an imposter, like I'm just pretending to be this successful entrepreneur. But then I look back at where I started and realize how much I've learned and how much I've grown. It hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. Looking back, there were a few key things that helped me succeed. First, it was about finding something I was truly passionate about. If I had stayed in engineering, I don't think I would have had the drive to push through the hard times. Second, it was about taking risks. Dropping out of college was a huge risk, and there were times when I wondered if I had made a mistake. But in the end, it was that risk that set me on a different path. And lastly, it was about persistence. The road was long, and there were plenty of moments when I wanted to give up. But I kept going. I kept learning, adapting, and pushing forward. If you're thinking about starting your own business, just remember this. It's not going to be easy, but it will be worth it. You'll face setbacks, you'll have moments of doubt, and you'll feel like quitting at times. But if you believe in what you're doing and stay focused, you can make it happen. Keep pushing and never stop learning. There's no blueprint for success, just your own journey. It was the summer of 2015 when I decided to quit my comfortable office job and take the leap into entrepreneurship. I was working as a project manager at a mid-sized marketing firm, making a decent salary with benefits and an office with a view. From the outside, everything seemed perfect. But inside, I was restless. I had this burning desire to do something on my own, something bigger, something that I could truly pour my heart and soul into. Little did I know, this decision would lead me down a path of failure, self-doubt, and ultimately success, but not in the way I expected. I had always been the type of person who loved the idea of creating something from nothing. I had dabbled in side projects here and there, ranging from freelance writing to selling handmade jewelry. But none of those projects ever had the spark I was looking for. I wanted to build a business, a brand, something that would not only change my life, but could potentially change the lives of others. So, I began brainstorming. The problem was, I had no real experience. Sure, I had worked in marketing, but marketing for a company is entirely different from marketing your own product or service. And while I had some ideas, I wasn't sure what would work. I was in my late 20s, with no savings, no real safety net, and no idea what I was getting myself into. I started by diving into the world of e-commerce. Dropshipping seemed like an easy entry point. I wouldn't have to carry inventory, and I could run the business from anywhere. So, I set up a website and started browsing product suppliers. I chose a niche I was passionate about, eco-friendly products. Specifically, reusable shopping bags made from sustainable materials. At first, things were slow. I spent hours researching SEO, writing blog posts, and tweaking my website. I thought that if I built it, customers would come. But after 3 months of hard work, I had barely made any sales. My marketing efforts weren't getting the traction I hoped for, and I was burning through money on Facebook ads that didn't seem to convert. I was about to throw in the towel when a friend of mine, who had been following my journey, suggested that I should pivot. "Maybe you're not tapping into the right market," she said. "Why not focus on a specific audience that really cares about sustainability? You could target eco-conscious millennials who are into zero-waste living. That could work." I was skeptical at first. I had tried to target a broad audience, but maybe she was onto something. I decided to take her advice and completely rebrand my business. I revamped my website, changed my messaging, and began curating content around the zero-waste lifestyle. I also started offering other products, like bamboo toothbrushes and stainless steel straws, to build out the eco-friendly product line. To my surprise, the pivot worked. Slowly but surely, sales started to trickle in. It wasn't a flood of orders at first, but it was enough to keep me motivated. Over time, I refined my marketing strategy. I began working with influencers in the zero-waste community and sending free products to bloggers who were already discussing sustainability. I partnered with online eco-conscious communities to promote my products in exchange for visibility. A few months later, I was starting to see real growth. I had been able to quit my day job, and the business was now generating enough revenue to support me and my growing team. But despite the success, I was still struggling internally. The imposter syndrome hit me hard. I kept thinking, I'm not qualified to run a business. I'm just lucky. As the business grew, so did my responsibilities. I was managing a team, handling customer service, working on product development, and trying to stay on top of the ever-changing digital marketing trends. It was overwhelming at times, and I often found myself questioning whether I was cut out for this. But one thing I had learned throughout my journey was that failure was an inevitable part of the process. It was a lesson I had learned early on when my first e-commerce venture flopped. I was used to dealing with failure, but this time, I was determined to make it work. In 2018, I decided to launch a new product line, reusable water bottles made from stainless steel. It was a big gamble, but I believed in the growing trend of sustainability, and I thought it could be a great addition to my brand. I poured all my savings into the production and marketing of the new product, and it was one of the riskiest moves I had ever made. At first, the water bottles didn't sell as well as I'd hoped. I spent sleepless nights worrying that I had made a huge mistake. But then something amazing happened. One of my bottles was featured on a popular eco-friendly influencer's Instagram page, and suddenly, I was flooded with orders. Sales went through the roof, and I realized that I had finally found the product that would propel my business to the next level. The next few years were a whirlwind. We expanded our product offerings, improved our website, and began shipping internationally. We built a loyal customer base that believed in our mission, and I started to feel more confident in my abilities as an entrepreneur. But even as the business flourished, I never forgot those early struggles. I knew that at any moment, things could change. That's the nature of entrepreneurship. In 2021, the pandemic hit, and the world was thrown into chaos. Supply chains were disrupted, and many businesses, including mine, struggled to keep up with demand. The eco-friendly market saw a surge in popularity, but it also came with a new set of challenges. Shipping costs skyrocketed, and it became more difficult to maintain consistent product quality. For the first time in years, I was terrified that my business might not survive. But instead of giving up, I focused on adapting. We streamlined our operations, worked with local suppliers to reduce shipping delays, and shifted our focus to products that were in high demand. It wasn't easy, but we made it through. Now, in 2025, I look back on everything that has happened, the failures, the setbacks, and the triumphs. My business is thriving, and we've expanded into new markets and product lines. We've become a trusted brand for eco-conscious consumers, and I feel proud of what we've built. But I still feel the weight of those early struggles. The journey has been anything but easy, but every challenge taught me something valuable. What I've learned along the way is that success isn't just about the final destination, it's about the journey itself. It's about pushing through the hard times, learning from failure, and continually evolving. Entrepreneurship is messy, unpredictable, and often overwhelming, but it's also incredibly rewarding. So, to anyone out there thinking about starting their own business, my advice is simple. Don't be afraid to fail. Embrace the setbacks, learn from them, and keep going. You might not know exactly where the road will take you, but that's what makes the journey so exciting. If I can do it, so can you. I've always been the kind of person who loved a challenge. Growing up in a small town, I wasn't handed much in terms of privilege or resources. My parents worked hard to keep the bills paid and food on the table, but they weren't exactly entrepreneurial types. They valued stability, and while I respected their work ethic, I always had this nagging feeling inside me that there was something more I could do. Fast forward to my mid-20s, I was working a regular 9-to-5 job in marketing for a mid-sized company. The pay was decent, but I was frustrated. I wanted more independence, more impact, more control over my life. I started thinking about entrepreneurship. It wasn't something I had grown up with, but the more I read about successful people, the more it seemed like they were all just ordinary people who decided to take a risk. At the time, I had no savings, no business experience, and no idea how to start. But I had this fire inside me that I couldn't ignore. I knew it was time to make a change. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled across an ad for a course on e-commerce. I had dabbled with online shopping for years, and I knew the power of e-commerce. So I clicked, watched the intro video, and something clicked inside me. Maybe this was my ticket. The course was affordable, about $200, which was manageable even on my tight budget. I spent the next few months learning everything I could. I absorbed every free resource I could find, YouTube tutorials, blogs, podcasts, you name it. But even with all the knowledge, I felt completely overwhelmed. I had no idea what product to sell, how to find suppliers, or even where to begin. It wasn't until I started experimenting with some small dropshipping stores that things started to take shape. I spent weeks researching trending products, designing simple websites, and tweaking my marketing strategies. I was burning the candle at both ends, working full-time during the day and hustling my e-commerce side project at night. I tried selling everything from phone accessories to pet products, but nothing seemed to click. Every time I would get excited about a new product, sales would drop within a week. Then, one night, I stumbled upon a niche that seemed to be gaining traction: sustainable, eco-friendly products. I had always cared about the environment, but I never considered turning that passion into a business. I began researching eco-friendly alternatives for everyday products, things like bamboo toothbrushes, reusable straws, and natural skincare. There was a growing demand for these kinds of items, and the market wasn't oversaturated like some of the other niches I had tried. With a new sense of direction, I launched my first real product line: eco-friendly personal care products. I focused on creating a brand that emphasized sustainability, quality, and transparency. I learned how to build a brand around a mission, something bigger than just selling products. I sourced my items from ethical suppliers, created a website with a clean, minimalist design, and started building my social media presence. The first few months were tough. I barely made any sales, and I was starting to question if I had made the wrong decision. But I kept going. I reached out to influencers in the eco-friendly space to promote my products, and I refined my paid advertising strategy. Slowly but surely, my sales started to climb. By month 6, I was making enough to quit my job. That was both exciting and terrifying. I had no backup plan, no guarantees. It was all on me now. But the freedom and potential were worth the risk. I poured every ounce of energy into my business, learning from mistakes, tweaking my strategy, and working with suppliers to expand my product offerings. I hired my first employee, a customer service rep, and slowly built a small team. The growth wasn't immediate, but it was steady. By the end of my first year, my business had turned a profit, and I had built a loyal customer base. I was able to move my operations into a larger warehouse and start expanding my product line. We started offering not just personal care items, but a wider range of sustainable home goods and even eco-friendly clothing. But even with the growth, there were challenges at every turn. I remember one incident vividly. We had a shipment of products arrive that didn't meet our quality standards, and we had to recall them. The logistical nightmare of getting the products back, issuing refunds, and maintaining customer trust was overwhelming. but I learned the importance of staying calm and communicating transparently with my customers. We were honest about the issue, issued full refunds, and even gave out discount codes to everyone affected. It was one of the hardest moments, but it turned into one of the most defining moments for my brand. Our customers appreciated our integrity, and many of them stayed loyal. Looking back, I realized that one of the key things that helped me succeed was my willingness to learn and adapt. I didn't have a business degree, and I certainly wasn't born into money, but I was relentless in my pursuit of knowledge. I wasn't afraid to fail, and I embraced each failure as a stepping stone to something better. Now, nearly 4 years into running my business, I've been able to create something that not only supports my family but also gives back to the environment. Our company donates a portion of profits to environmental organizations, and we've even started a program to plant trees with every purchase made. It's been a long journey, but I'm proud of how far we've come. I'm not saying this to brag, far from it. I'm saying this because I want anyone reading this to know that you can start from nothing and build something meaningful. If I can do it, so can you. The key is to keep pushing, stay flexible, and be willing to adapt. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need a clear vision and the will to make it happen. There are days when it still feels like I'm treading water, trying to stay ahead of the competition or navigate new market trends. But those challenges are what drive me forward. Entrepreneurship isn't easy, but it's the most fulfilling thing I've ever done. To anyone out there thinking about taking the leap, do it. It might take time, it might be hard, but it's worth every moment of struggle. Trust the process, learn from your mistakes, and don't be afraid to pivot when needed. The road to success is rarely linear, but it's your road to carve. I still don't know everything, but I've learned a lot along the way. And if I can do it, so can you. A few years ago, I found myself sitting at a coffee shop, staring at my laptop, and wondering how the hell I was going to turn my life around. I had just quit my stable corporate job, walked away from the salary I had been working so hard for, and was now on my own with nothing but a vague idea of what I wanted to do. I remember thinking, I've just thrown away everything I've worked for. And for what? I was at my lowest point, but looking back now, I realize it was the best decision I ever made. Let me backtrack a bit. I wasn't always this reckless. Growing up, I was the kid who always played by the rules. I got good grades, went to a reputable university, and after graduation, landed a solid job at a big tech company. The first few years were the dream. I was climbing the ladder quickly, making good money, and all my friends and family told me how lucky I was to have such a stable career. But after a while, something started to feel off. It's not like I hated my job, it was just that the excitement I once felt started to fade. The endless meetings, the politics, and the constant pressure to perform wore me down. I was working 12-hour days, missing family events, and realizing I didn't have time for the things I once loved. Worst of all, I wasn't learning anything new. I felt like I was stuck in a loop. I wasn't growing, and I didn't know how to change it. I thought about switching jobs, moving to another company where I could start fresh, but deep down, I knew that wouldn't solve the problem. The issue wasn't the company, it was me. I was burning out, and I didn't know how to fix it. So, after months of debating with myself, I made the leap. I handed in my resignation, packed up my desk, and left. I had no clear plan, but I knew I had to get out. The first few weeks were a blur. I slept in, worked out more, and tried to find clarity. I'd tell myself, this is a new chapter. I can do anything. But the reality of it hit hard. It wasn't like I had a huge savings cushion. I had enough to get by for a few months, but I wasn't rolling in money by any means. And that's when the anxiety kicked in. What if I failed? What if I couldn't figure out what I was supposed to do next? The weight of uncertainty was unbearable. I started by taking on freelance gigs, writing, consulting, anything that could bring in some cash. It was slow going at first. I wasn't making much money, but I was learning how to navigate the world of self-employment. I started to build a small client base, but it wasn't enough to sustain me long term. That's when I had an idea. I've always been passionate about fitness, but I was never a gym person. I loved running, hiking, and doing outdoor activities. During my time in the corporate world, I had started a blog to document my fitness journey. It was nothing special at first, just a few posts about what I was doing, how I was staying fit, and the occasional product review. But over time, people started reading it. They began commenting, sharing, and asking for advice. I realized I had built a small community of like-minded people who were interested in the same things I was. It wasn't huge, but it was growing. One evening, while I was sitting in my living room, I thought, why not turn this into something bigger? I knew I could monetize the blog, maybe even start a coaching business. I had nothing to lose, so I dove in headfirst. It wasn't an overnight success, that's for sure. I spent months learning everything I could about content creation, SEO, digital marketing, and online business. I created online fitness guides, started offering one-on-one coaching, and worked on building my brand. I also reached out to brands in the fitness space, asking if they would collaborate with me. At first, it was a struggle. Brands ignored my emails, and I got little to no response. But I didn't give up. I kept refining my pitch, tweaking my approach, and improving my offerings. Then, something clicked. One day, a major fitness brand emailed me back with an offer to collaborate. It wasn't a huge deal, but it was a start. That collaboration led to another, and soon I was working with some of the top names in the industry. My following grew, my income started to rise, and I could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. But just as I thought things were getting easy, life threw me a curveball. I got sick. It wasn't anything too serious, but it knocked me out for weeks. During that time, I had to learn how to operate my business without being hands-on all the time. I had to rely on my team, hire people, and trust others to handle parts of the business I used to do myself. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I realized that if I wanted to scale my business and make it truly sustainable, I couldn't do everything myself. It took a while to adjust to this new way of working, but eventually, my team and I figured it out. I shifted from being the person who did everything to being the one who managed the big picture. I stopped trying to do everything and focused on what I was good at, creating content and building relationships. A couple of years later, my business was thriving. I had multiple streams of income, from coaching, brand partnerships, affiliate marketing, and even some products of my own. I was finally in a position where I could afford to live the life I wanted. I bought a house, traveled more, and had the freedom to do what I loved. But most importantly, I felt fulfilled. I was doing work that mattered to me, and I was helping others along the way. Looking back, I still can't believe how far I've come. There were times when I wanted to quit, when I doubted myself, and when I thought I'd made a huge mistake. But I pushed through. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast, but it was worth it. I've learned that entrepreneurship isn't about taking huge risks and hoping for the best. It's about persistence, adaptability, and knowing when to ask for help. So, if you're reading this and you're thinking about taking the leap, I say go for it. But don't expect everything to be perfect right away. You'll fail. You'll make mistakes. But those mistakes will teach you more than any success ever could. Trust the process, take it one step at a time, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. I'm not a millionaire yet, but I'm getting closer. And more importantly, I'm living life on my terms, and that's worth more than any paycheck I ever received in the corporate world. If I can do it, so can you. Stay persistent. Keep going. I've never been the type to talk about my journey. My friends and family often joke about how private I am, but I guess that's just how I've always been. Still, I've been reflecting a lot lately, especially after a recent business milestone, and thought it was time to share my story. It's not an overnight success. In fact, if I had to describe my journey, I'd call it more of a grind with more setbacks than I care to admit. Let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in a small town, where opportunities felt limited, and the future seemed pretty set for most people. You either worked in the local factory, taught at the public school, or went into farming. My parents were teachers, and while they were supportive of me, there was this unspoken belief that I should follow the path they walked. But I couldn't shake this feeling that I was meant for something else, something bigger. Maybe I was just naive, or maybe I had that entrepreneurial fire burning from an early age. I didn't even know what entrepreneurship truly meant back then. All I knew was that I was determined to figure it out. While other kids were out playing sports or hanging out at the local diner, I was tinkering with ideas. I had no money, no connections, and barely any business experience, but I was hungry. I started small, too small, if I'm honest. I tried selling used video games online. This was back in 2005, when eBay was still king and the internet wasn't quite as saturated as it is now. At first, it was exciting. I would list a game, get a bid, and feel that rush when it sold. But soon, I realized that there were 100 other people doing the exact same thing. Prices plummeted, and I started to lose money. I tried to diversify by selling other things, anything that could make me a buck. But no matter what I did, I was always fighting against the tide. Eventually, I gave up. It wasn't a failure that hurt me. It was the realization that I hadn't learned anything about running a business. I had no systems, no understanding of margins, and no idea about how to scale. I had simply been throwing spaghetti at the wall. I didn't stop there, though. In fact, I think that failure planted the seed for what would eventually become my first real business. I decided to go back to school and study marketing, hoping to get the skills I needed. I didn't know what I was going to do with them, but I was determined to figure it out. It wasn't easy. I juggled late-night study sessions with part-time jobs, often feeling like I was working nonstop just to stay afloat. But something changed in me during that time. I began to realize that marketing wasn't just about selling stuff. It was about understanding people, tapping into their desires, and connecting with them on a deeper level. In my final year of school, I came across a startup competition, and I decided to enter with a business idea that had been brewing in my mind. It was an online platform designed to connect small businesses with freelance marketers. The idea came from my own frustrations when I'd started trying to market my failed eBay business. There were so many small businesses out there that couldn't afford large marketing agencies but still needed help with their branding, social media, and SEO. I thought, why not create a place where these businesses could connect with talented freelancers who could help them? The competition was fierce, but I pitched my idea with the same determination that had driven me through all the previous failures. Surprisingly, I won. The prize money wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to get my idea off the ground. I used it to hire a few freelancers, built the website, and launched my platform. At first, it was a struggle. I had zero experience with coding or building a website, and the platform was clunky at best. The first few months, I barely had any users. I did everything myself: marketing, customer support, outreach, and content. It was exhausting, and there were days when I seriously thought about quitting. But I refused to let go. Over time, I started learning more about the nuances of running an online business. I refined my marketing strategy, focused on building relationships with small business owners, and tweaked the platform based on user feedback. Slowly but surely, things began to click. I started getting consistent traffic, and people were signing up. The real breakthrough came when I focused on a specific niche: social media marketing. Instead of trying to be everything for everyone, I honed in on helping small businesses grow their presence on platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. That move allowed me to carve out a space in a crowded market and differentiate myself from competitors. By the end of the first year, the platform had gained traction, and I was making enough to cover my costs. It wasn't glamorous, but it was sustainable. Then came the turning point: an unexpected partnership with a large marketing agency that saw potential in what I was doing. They offered to invest in my platform and help scale it. I was hesitant at first. I had always been so protective of my business, but after talking with a few trusted mentors, I realized that this partnership could be the lifeline I needed to take my business to the next level. Fast forward 5 years, and my small platform had transformed into a full-fledged marketing agency with a team of over 30 people. We had clients across the globe, and we were making a real impact. The journey hadn't been easy, but looking back, I can see that every setback, every failure, and every sleepless night was a step toward where I am today. Here's the thing: entrepreneurship isn't glamorous. It's messy, it's filled with doubts, and it often feels like you're climbing an endless hill. But there's something so rewarding about pushing through those tough times. There were days when I thought I was completely out of my depth. There were moments when I thought about throwing in the towel. But I kept going, because the idea of giving up felt worse than the struggle. And it turns out, that was the key. Now, I'm not a billionaire. I'm not even in the six-figure club yet. But I've built a business that allows me to live comfortably and do what I love. I get to work with incredible people, help small businesses grow, and continue learning every day. And when I think back to that kid trying to sell used video games on eBay, I can't help but smile. The path I took wasn't easy, and it definitely wasn't fast, but I'm proud of where I've ended up. I've learned that success isn't about avoiding failure, it's about learning from it and never giving up. If you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, know that it won't be easy. There will be times when you question everything. But if you have the resilience to keep going, to learn from your mistakes, and to keep pushing forward, you'll get there. It might take years, it might take decades, but it will be worth it in the end. Trust me. I was 22 years old, fresh out of college, and living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment with a view of a gas station across the street. It wasn't exactly what I imagined my life would look like after getting my degree in business administration, but I had the determination to make it work. My dream wasn't a corporate job at some big company. No, I had bigger aspirations. I wanted to build something of my own, to be my own boss, and to create something that could stand the test of time. It all started with a simple idea I had while sitting at my kitchen table one night, looking at my phone. I had just finished a long day of job hunting, and I was tired of sending out resumes and hearing nothing back. I started thinking about the things that irritated me every day and how I could solve them. That's when it hit me. There was no easy way to get high-quality, healthy snacks delivered to your door on a regular basis. Sure, there were plenty of subscription services for everything from books to shaving razors, but nothing focused on healthy, convenient snacks. I could be the one to fill that gap. I started researching. I knew nothing about the snack industry, and I had no idea how to set up a subscription service. But I was good at figuring things out, and I was determined. I began reading everything I could about subscription businesses, logistics, sourcing food, packaging, and marketing. I learned about suppliers, how to negotiate prices, and the importance of branding. Every free moment I had, I spent learning or working on my idea. I didn't have much capital, just a few $1,000s I had saved up from my summer internship and some birthday money. So, I started small. I created a basic website, put together a few sample boxes, and set up an Instagram account to showcase the snacks. My initial plan was to offer a weekly snack box with a mix of nuts, dried fruits, and healthy protein bars. The idea was simple, but I was excited. Getting the first sale was a huge milestone. I remember refreshing my email inbox late one night, hoping for some sign of progress. Then, there it was, order confirmation. Someone had actually bought a box. I was ecstatic. My heart raced as I printed the shipping label and carefully packed the box with the snacks I had handpicked. I took it to the post office the next morning, and the excitement of sending out that first box felt like a huge victory. It was a small win, but it felt monumental. But things didn't stay easy for long. After that first order, it became clear that I had no idea what I was doing. I quickly ran into a host of problems: product sourcing, unreliable suppliers, and packaging delays. At one point, my supplier sent me an entire batch of expired granola bars, and I had to scramble to find a replacement before the next subscription box went out. My website was glitchy, and the design was far from sleek. Customer service was a nightmare. I had no system in place to track orders or respond to inquiries quickly. I felt overwhelmed, like I was drowning in all the details I hadn't thought about before. During that tough phase, I nearly gave up. I thought, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I should just take a job and stop wasting time on something that's not going to work. I even started looking at job listings again, but something inside me wouldn't let me quit. I thought about all the people who had successful businesses and how they had to go through the same struggles. The ones who made it weren't the ones who gave up when things got hard. They were the ones who found a way to keep going. So, I decided to take a step back and rethink my approach. I realized I needed help if I was going to make this work. I reached out to a few people in my network who had experience in e-commerce and branding. They gave me invaluable advice and helped me improve my website's user experience. I also took a deep dive into sourcing and packaging, finding more reliable suppliers and working out deals with them to ensure the quality and freshness of my products. The next big breakthrough came when I invested in better marketing. I was still on a tight budget, but I knew I had to spend money to make money. I ran targeted Facebook ads focusing on people who were interested in health and fitness. I worked with local influencers to promote my brand. Slowly but surely, my subscriber base started to grow. My first month after refining the process was my first profitable month. It wasn't a huge profit, but it was a turning point. From that point on, things started to snowball. I reinvested the profits into expanding the business, improving the packaging, offering more snack options, and launching a referral program to encourage word-of-mouth marketing. I began to hire a few contractors to help with the logistics and customer service, which freed up my time to focus on growth. But it wasn't all smooth sailing from there. A few months into scaling, I hit another major obstacle. My supplier for one of my most popular snacks abruptly went out of business, and I had to find a replacement quickly. I also learned that scaling a business requires more than just putting out fires. It requires systems and processes that can handle growth. I spent countless hours refining everything from inventory management to customer feedback loops. I learned that being an entrepreneur is less about having the best ideas and more about being able to adapt and solve problems as they arise. Fast forward to today, and the business has grown far beyond what I ever imagined when I was sitting in my tiny apartment, brainstorming snack box ideas. We now ship thousands of boxes every month, and we've expanded to include a wide variety of products, everything from protein snacks to gluten-free treats. I have a small team of dedicated people, and we've even moved into a larger office. We've worked hard to create a brand that resonates with health-conscious individuals, and we're proud to offer high-quality snacks that are convenient and healthy. The journey hasn't been easy, but it has been worth it. I've learned so much along the way: how to build a brand, how to handle setbacks, how to keep pushing even when things seem impossible. If I had quit when things got tough, I wouldn't be where I am today. Entrepreneurship isn't glamorous. It's about working through the challenges and learning from them. It's about resilience, perseverance, and adapting to what comes your way. If you're thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple: don't give up when things get hard. The road is never straight, but if you keep going, you might just surprise yourself with what you can accomplish. The struggle behind a dream. My journey from broke to building a startup. I still remember the first day I told my friends I was going to start a business. We were sitting at a bar, the kind where the beer's cheap, and the chatter is loud enough that you can pretend the world is perfect. It was right after my college graduation, and I had this fire in me, somewhere between ambition and naivety, that I could create something incredible. I was in my mid-20s, fresh out of school with a degree I didn't care much about, and a head full of ideas. That night, I made the mistake of sharing my dream. "I'm going to start a tech company," I said, full of confidence. I had no product, no idea what I was doing, but I figured tech was the way forward. I had always been a decent coder and understood the basics of software development, but I had no formal training in business or entrepreneurship. But that didn't matter to me. I was ready to take the world by storm. The next few months were a whirlwind of optimism, frustration, and doubt. I spent most of my time reading about successful startups and watching videos on how to disrupt industries. I even bought a few online courses on coding, but looking back, I can see now I was just looking for distractions, avoiding the reality of what it takes to actually build something. The first major hurdle came when I realized I had no money. Sure, I had saved a little, but after graduation, I needed to find something stable, something that would pay the bills. So, I ended up getting a job at a startup that seemed promising. It was a small company, and I thought it would be the perfect place to learn. I'd make some money, gain experience, and in my free time, work on my own project. But the reality of working at a startup was much harsher than I expected. The hours were long, the pay was low, and I found myself constantly exhausted. Every day, I came home too tired to code or work on my own project. I remember thinking that I'd be able to work on my business once I learned the ropes from this job. The problem was, I didn't have time to learn anything beyond just surviving. By the time I got home, I only had enough energy to scroll through social media, maybe watch an episode of some show, and crash for the night. This went on for a solid year. It wasn't until one night, about 15 months into the job, when something shifted. I had been up late working on an idea for an app, a simple one, mind you, that could help small businesses manage customer feedback more efficiently. The idea wasn't revolutionary, but I thought it had potential. I had already started building a basic prototype during my free time, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was doing something meaningful. That's when I decided to quit. No safety net. No backup plan. I was going all in. I remember calling my parents and telling them I was quitting my stable job to pursue my business idea. They were supportive, but I could sense the concern in their voices. They thought I was making a huge mistake. "Are you sure?" my mom asked. "You have a steady job, health insurance, a future." My dad was a bit more blunt. "You're going to fail." It wasn't the most encouraging conversation, but I wasn't deterred. I had already made my decision. Quitting my job wasn't the easy part. It was the transition. For the first few months, I was juggling multiple side hustles to keep the lights on. I'd do freelance web development in the mornings and then work on my startup at night. The problem was, I wasn't getting any traction with my app idea. I was working 12-hour days and not seeing results. My savings dwindled, and my confidence started to wane. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was failing, that I had made a massive mistake by quitting my job. Then, after about 6 months of struggle, something unexpected happened. I had built a working version of the app, but I had no idea how to market it. I didn't have connections in the industry, and the idea of reaching out to businesses seemed terrifying. But then I remembered a mentor from my old job. He was a senior developer, and though we didn't work closely, he had been incredibly generous with his time when I had questions. I decided to send him an email out of the blue. I explained my situation and asked if he could give me some advice on marketing a tech product. To my surprise, he responded, offering to meet up. We met at a coffee shop, and I explained what I was working on. After listening carefully, he gave me some advice that completely changed my perspective. Don't try to sell your app to businesses. Instead, talk to the users first. Understand their pain points and build a relationship with them. You're not selling a product, you're building a solution. That advice hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been so focused on perfecting the product that I hadn't considered the importance of understanding the end user. It wasn't about features or functionalities, it was about solving real problems. The next few weeks, I changed my approach. Instead of trying to market my app to businesses, I began reaching out to small business owners directly. I asked them questions, got feedback, and iterated on the product. Slowly but surely, I started seeing results. I gained a handful of users who loved the app, and that gave me the momentum to push forward. Things weren't perfect, and there were still countless sleepless nights, but the ball was finally rolling. After about a year of working nonstop, I secured my first round of funding. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get me to the next stage, hiring a small team. I brought on a designer and a marketer, both of whom were just as passionate about the product as I was. Together, we worked day and night to refine the app and develop a go-to-market strategy. Fast forward 2 years. The app, once started as a one-person project, now has hundreds of paying users. We've grown our team to 10 people, and we've secured multiple rounds of funding. We've even started to expand into new markets and features. It's not the massive tech giant I dreamed of back at the bar that night, but it's a thriving business, and I'm incredibly proud of what we've built. Looking back, I've learned so many lessons along the way. The most important one is that the path to success isn't linear. It's messy, full of doubts, failures, and mistakes, but if you're willing to keep going, keep learning, and keep adapting, you'll find your way. I couldn't have imagined how tough the road would be, but it was worth every single moment. My story isn't unique, but it's mine, and it's one of growth, perseverance, and, most importantly, the belief that even the toughest struggles can lead to something amazing. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. A few years ago, I was sitting in a cubicle at a corporate job, wearing a suit and tie, counting the minutes until the end of the day. It wasn't that I hated the work. I didn't. It was that I had always felt like I was meant for something bigger, something different. I was constantly imagining what my life would look like if I wasn't bound by the rigid structure of the 9 to 5 grind. I daydreamed about being my own boss, running a business, and building something from scratch. But, like most people, I didn't know how to take that first step. I didn't have a background in business, and honestly, I was terrified of failure. It felt like the kind of thing that only happened for people who had a lot of money to start with or some kind of special skill. Then, one fateful weekend, everything changed. I had just finished a week of working late at the office when I went to visit my best friend, Ryan. Ryan and I had been friends since high school, and we had always been a little bit on the same wavelength. He had recently moved to a new city to work for a tech startup, and we were catching up over a couple of beers. As we were chatting, he casually mentioned that he had started a side hustle. I didn't think much of it at first. Everyone these days was starting side hustles, right? But then he went into more detail. He wasn't just selling stuff on Etsy or running a dropshipping store. No, Ryan had developed a mobile app that was starting to gain some traction. It was a simple idea, an app that helped people track their personal finances. But the more he talked about it, the more excited I got. He wasn't talking about theory or hopes and dreams. He was talking about something real, something he had built and was seeing success with. He was making money. It was happening. I had always known Ryan was smart, but hearing him talk about his app, I realized something. If he could do it, why couldn't I? The idea sat with me for a few days. I kept thinking about it, how cool it would be to create something that could truly change people's lives. But I kept running into roadblocks in my mind. I didn't know how to code. I didn't have an idea for an app or a product, and I didn't have any experience in tech or entrepreneurship. I was just a regular guy working in a corporate job. But then it hit me. Maybe I didn't need to know how to do everything myself. Maybe I could learn the skills, or better yet, find people who already had them. I started researching everything I could about starting a business. I read books, watched YouTube videos, and listened to podcasts. I looked up information about building an app, starting a company, and raising funds. It was overwhelming, but at the same time, it felt exciting. The idea of building something of my own was like a fire that couldn't be put out. But I still had no idea where to start. I decided to get some help. I reached out to Ryan and asked if he had any advice on how to begin. He was more than willing to help, but he also gave me some tough love. "Look, man," he said, "there's no easy way to do this. You're going to have to put in the work. It's going to be hard, and there are going to be a lot of moments when you want to quit. But if you really want it, you have to commit." That was the moment I knew I had to take the plunge. I started looking for co-founders, people who had the skills I lacked. I found 2 developers on a startup forum, one who had built apps before and one who was an expert in user experience design. I also reached out to a couple of friends who had experience in marketing and business development. With their help, I was able to come up with an idea for an app that combined my knowledge of personal finance with the expertise of my team. We started small, working in our free time after our day jobs. We would meet up on weekends to brainstorm, design, and code. It was chaotic and often frustrating. There were plenty of moments when we wondered if it would ever come together. Our first prototype was full of bugs, and the design looked like something from the early 2000s. But little by little, we made progress. We started building an audience, gathering feedback, and improving the app. It wasn't perfect, but we were learning and growing. After about 6 months of hard work, we had a working version of the app that we felt was ready for launch. But I quickly realized something important. Launching the app was only half the battle. The real challenge was getting people to use it. We had all this tech, all this work we had poured into the app, but if no one knew about it, it wouldn't matter. That's when I had my first real taste of the entrepreneurial grind. We had no budget for marketing, so we had to get creative. I started reaching out to bloggers, influencers, and journalists, offering them free access to the app in exchange for a review. I joined online communities and forums where people were talking about personal finance and slowly started building a reputation. We also reached out to people who had downloaded our app and asked them to refer their friends. And then, something incredible happened. Slowly but surely, users started coming in. The reviews were mostly positive, and the user base began to grow. It wasn't exponential growth at first, but it was enough to keep us going. We were starting to make some money, enough to justify continuing to work on it full-time. About a year after launching, we made a decision that would change everything. I quit my corporate job. It was a huge leap. I was giving up a steady paycheck, health benefits, and job security. But by that point, the app had started to generate a significant income, and I felt confident enough to take the plunge. I was terrified, but I knew it was the right decision. The next couple of years were a whirlwind. We continued to grow the app, refining it based on user feedback and improving our marketing efforts. The team expanded, we brought in new partners, and we began to hire employees. I learned how to navigate the complexities of running a business, from managing cash flow to scaling operations. There were plenty of ups and downs, but the thing that kept me going was the belief that I was building something real. Fast forward to today, and our app has millions of users, a profitable business model, and a growing team. I'm proud of what we've built, but I'm also proud of the journey. I went from being a guy who was afraid to start a business to running one. I learned that you don't have to know everything at the start. You just need to be willing to learn, fail, and keep going. So, if you're sitting in a cubicle like I was, dreaming about doing something different, I want to tell you this. It's possible. You don't have to have all the answers or all the resources. You just have to take that first step, and then keep going, even when it gets hard. You never know where it might take you. Now, I'm working on new projects, and while the work is still challenging, I wouldn't change a thing. Building a business was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's also been the most rewarding. So, here's my advice. If you have that fire inside you, don't let it burn out. Take the leap. Start today. You'll never regret it. I never set out to be an entrepreneur. Growing up, I was the typical kid who didn't know what he wanted to be when he grew up. I figured I would go to college, get a degree, and eventually get a job like everyone else. That was the plan, anyway. I didn't come from a family of entrepreneurs. My parents worked regular jobs, my dad was a mechanic, and my mom was a teacher. They always encouraged me to work hard, get good grades, and live a stable life. But life, as it often does, had other plans. It all started when I was 25. I had graduated from a state university with a degree in communications. I wasn't passionate about the subject, but it seemed practical. I found a decent job at a marketing agency, and everything seemed like it was going according to plan. I had a steady paycheck, health insurance, and even started putting a little money into savings. But something didn't sit right. Every day at work felt the same. I'd wake up, go to the office, sit at my desk, do the same tasks, and repeat it all the next day. It wasn't the work itself that was bad. It was just boring. The agency was small, and I had the same responsibilities as everyone else. I was good at what I did, but it didn't feel like it meant anything. It didn't excite me, and worst of all, it didn't challenge me. One day, during a meeting, I overheard a conversation between two of the senior managers. They were talking about a new project, something that would bring in a lot of new clients if they executed it right. The whole conversation made me realize how much of the success of the company depended on a few key people who could push things forward. I wasn't one of those people. It hit me hard that I was just a cog in the machine. That night, I went home feeling frustrated. I told my girlfriend at the time about how I was feeling. She was supportive, but also a little confused. "So, what do you want to do?" she asked. I didn't have a clear answer, but I knew one thing. I didn't want to keep doing what I was doing forever. Something had to change. I spent the next few months thinking about what that change would look like. I had always been interested in health and fitness, but I wasn't the type to be obsessed with working out. I had a regular gym routine, but it wasn't like I was a fitness guru. What I did have was a lot of friends and family who struggled with their health, whether it was losing weight, building muscle, or just feeling better overall. One evening, I had an epiphany. What if I could create something that combined my marketing skills with my passion for fitness? I didn't want to be a personal trainer or open a gym. That wasn't my style. But I knew that people were looking for help and guidance in a more accessible way. After a lot of thought, I decided to create a platform, a website and app that could offer personalized workout plans and nutritional advice for people based on their goals and current fitness levels. It wasn't a totally new idea. There were apps and websites that offered similar services, but they were either too generic or too expensive for the average person. I wanted to create something affordable, customizable, and easy to use. I wanted to meet people where they were at, whether they were beginners or experienced athletes. I spent the next several months researching the market. I read everything I could find about fitness trends, digital marketing, app development, and user experience design. I took online courses in areas where I felt weak, like web development and basic programming. I knew I couldn't do everything myself, but I figured I could at least understand the process enough to hire the right people when the time came. During this phase, I was working full-time at the agency. I was exhausted. I'd wake up at 6 a.m., go to work, come home around 6 p.m., eat dinner, and then spend the next 4 to 5 hours building my platform. It was exhausting, but I was driven. I didn't tell anyone at work about what I was doing. I didn't want anyone to think I was slacking off, and I didn't want anyone to steal my idea. At some point, I realized I needed help. I wasn't a coder, and I couldn't build the app on my own. I started reaching out to freelance developers. After a few interviews, I found a guy named Kyle who seemed like a perfect fit. He had a background in building fitness apps and was eager to work on a new project. I hired him on a contract basis, and we got to work. The next several months were a blur. We worked long hours, fine-tuning the app and website. We made sure that the user experience was intuitive, the content was valuable, and the workouts and meal plans were both challenging and achievable. I used my marketing background to develop a brand and build a community around the platform, even before it was fully ready. I started a blog, shared fitness tips, and connected with potential users on social media. Slowly but surely, people started noticing. In the early days, money was tight. I was still working my full-time job and using my paycheck to fund the project. I didn't have a huge budget for advertising or fancy tools, but I knew that if I could just get a few users, I could prove the concept. I offered free trials to anyone who was willing to give feedback and make suggestions. In return, I got invaluable insights into what was working and what wasn't. It wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. After about 6 months of hard work, we launched the beta version of the app. I remember the day we went live. I was sitting at my desk at work, trying to act normal, but my heart was racing. I was terrified. What if no one signed up? What if people hated it? I kept refreshing the app's dashboard every few minutes, watching the numbers tick up slowly. But then something amazing happened. People started signing up. Not a huge amount, but enough to keep me motivated. They left positive feedback, shared their progress, and told their friends about it. We started to get some media attention as well. A fitness blogger featured our app in a roundup of the best new fitness tools, and suddenly we were getting hundreds of signups per day. The following months were a roller coaster. There were high points, like the first time we hit 10,000 active users, and low points, like when we discovered a major bug in the app that caused people to lose their data. But through it all, I kept pushing forward. Eventually, I quit my full-time job and focused on the business full-time. Fast forward to today, and my company has grown beyond anything I ever imagined. We have a small team, a solid user base, and we're consistently improving the app. We still face challenges, but I'm proud of what we've built. Most importantly, I've learned that success doesn't come overnight. It's about persistence, adaptability, and constantly learning from your mistakes. When I look back at where I started, I can't help but feel grateful. I never planned on being an entrepreneur, but now that I am, I can't imagine doing anything else. It's not always easy, but it's incredibly rewarding to build something that helps people and to know that I did it on my own terms. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that you don't have to have everything figured out from the beginning. Just start. Learn as you go, and don't be afraid to fail. You'll find your way, one step at a time. So here's my story. I didn't start with anything special. In fact, I was raised in a small town where the most exciting thing that happened was when the new Walmart opened up. My family wasn't poor, but we definitely didn't have much. I remember my mom working double shifts at a local diner, and my dad worked in construction. There was no such thing as a family vacation, and the only thing that seemed to keep us going was the sense that we were all in it together. I had this dream, though. Ever since I could remember, I wanted to be my own boss. The idea of working for someone else always felt like a trap. I didn't want to spend my life on someone else's schedule, answering to a boss who probably didn't care about me. That's not to say I didn't respect my parents' hard work. They were the hardest working people I knew, but I just always felt like there was more out there for me. My first taste of entrepreneurship came at 15. I started mowing lawns for extra cash. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I advertised by word of mouth and passed out flyers at local grocery stores. Eventually, I got a couple of regular clients. But as I kept doing this, I realized something. I wasn't just mowing lawns for cash. I was building a customer base. And it was a rush to see someone pay me for something I did, something I created. That feeling stuck with me. Fast forward a few years. I graduated high school with decent grades, but I didn't have a clear path. I tried college for a semester, but quickly dropped out. It wasn't for me. I wanted to do something on my own. Something bigger than just cutting grass. I started thinking about tech, specifically, the idea of creating a product or service that could make people's lives easier. At the time, smartphones were just starting to take off, and the idea of mobile apps seemed revolutionary. But I didn't have a tech background. I didn't even know how to code. Still, the idea of breaking into the tech world was appealing. And so, I started learning. I remember sitting in my parents' living room late at night, watching coding tutorials on YouTube. The first few weeks were rough. I didn't get anything. It was all gibberish, strings, variables, loops. I wanted to quit so many times. But I kept at it. Slowly, things started clicking. I built simple projects at first, a to-do list app, a weather app, stuff like that. Nothing groundbreaking, but it was enough to keep me motivated. Eventually, after months of learning, I was ready to take the next step. I wanted to build something real. I had an idea, a mobile app that could help small business owners track their expenses and manage their cash flow. It wasn't revolutionary, but I saw a gap in the market for something that was simple, intuitive, and cheap for small business owners like my parents to use. I had no idea how to build an app, no clue how to design it, but I knew I had to start. So, I hired a freelance designer to create the first mock-ups. I started coding the app in my spare time, often pulling all-nighters to get it done. There were so many moments of doubt, of wondering if this was even worth it. But something inside me kept telling me that this was my shot. The first version of the app was terrible. It was clunky, buggy, and far from what I envisioned. But I didn't care. I put it out there anyway. I launched it on the App Store and Google Play Store, and I started marketing it. I didn't have a big budget for ads, so I relied on social media and word of mouth. I messaged every small business owner I could find on LinkedIn, offering them a free trial of the app. Some people ignored me, some were skeptical, but a few took the bait. And it worked. As the first users started to give feedback, I began improving the app. Slowly, I fixed the bugs, added new features, and made it more user-friendly. The reviews started getting better, and people started sharing it with others. Within 6 months, I had 500 users. It wasn't a lot, but it was something. I was making money, small amounts at first, but it was still something. I kept working on the app every day, tweaking it, improving it, and listening to my users. I got better at marketing, figuring out which strategies worked. I joined online forums, Facebook groups, and attended local business networking events to spread the word. And then one day it happened. A local business blog wrote a feature on the app. The story went viral in the small business community. Downloads skyrocketed. I woke up one morning to find that my app had been downloaded over 1,000 times in a single day. My email inbox was flooded with inquiries and requests for more features. It was like a dream. From there, everything started to snowball. More users meant more feedback, which meant better updates. I started partnering with other small business service providers, offering discounts and cross-promotions. I even started getting offers from investors who wanted to back my app. It was surreal. Eventually, after a year of grinding, my app had 50,000 active users. I was making enough money to quit my day job, which, at that point, I was barely doing anyway. I moved out of my parents' house and rented a small office. I hired a small team, 2 developers and a customer support rep, and focused on growing the business. But even as I found success, I knew it wasn't guaranteed. I had faced so many challenges along the way. I dealt with imposter syndrome, self-doubt, and burnout. There were days when I didn't know if I could keep going. But every time I thought about giving up, I reminded myself that I had come too far. I couldn't let it all slip away. Today, my app is still growing. It's not the next Facebook or anything, but it's mine. I'm proud of what I've built, and it's allowed me to do things I never thought were possible, like hiring my own team, taking real vacations, and investing in other startups. I'm not rich, but I've achieved something far more valuable to me: freedom. The freedom to work on my own terms and to create something meaningful. Looking back, I realize it wasn't the tech skills that made the difference. It was the determination to keep going, the willingness to learn, and the ability to adapt to feedback. If I had given up after the first failure, or the second, or the 100th, none of this would have happened. And that's the biggest lesson I've learned. Success doesn't happen overnight. It's a result of consistently showing up, learning, and not giving up, no matter how hard it gets. If there's one thing I'd tell aspiring entrepreneurs, it's this. If you have an idea, no matter how small it seems, take the first step. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to have all the answers. But you do need to start. Because once you do, you'll be amazed at what you can accomplish. I never set out to be an entrepreneur. In fact, I spent most of my 20s convinced that a normal job was the way to go. College degree in hand, I followed the traditional path, get a stable 9-to-5 job, put in my time, climb the corporate ladder, and eventually retire to a cozy house with a white picket fence. It seemed like a solid plan, something that would bring me security and happiness. But life doesn't always go according to plan. And looking back, I'm not sure when the switch flipped, but I can't tell you exactly when I realized that the normal path was not for me. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, and I was sitting at my desk, feeling the familiar dread. I had been working in marketing for a tech company for about 2 years, and though I was making decent money, I was miserable. The work was repetitive. The office politics were draining. And most importantly, I had this nagging feeling that I was wasting my potential. I had ideas, big ideas, but no one cared. No one wanted to listen. I remember scrolling through my phone, looking at social media, when I stumbled across an Instagram post from an old friend of mine. She was showing off her new business, a sustainable clothing line she'd started from scratch. I couldn't believe it. She had no formal business training. She didn't have any connections. She just saw a problem and decided to create a solution. And now, she was living the life I had always thought I would have, except it was on her terms. That moment was a revelation for me. I had always admired the idea of entrepreneurship, but had convinced myself that it was too risky, too uncertain. I wasn't a born entrepreneur, I told myself. I was just someone who wanted a paycheck and job security. But seeing my friend create something out of nothing, with no real background in business, made me question everything. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'd lay awake at night wondering what it would be like to own a business, to build something from the ground up, to create my own success instead of waiting for someone else to decide my fate. The first step came when I started to do research. I wasn't naive enough to think it would be easy. I knew that starting a business took more than just an idea. It took strategy, hard work, and persistence. I began by reading everything I could about entrepreneurship. I joined online forums, watched countless YouTube videos, and listened to podcasts. Slowly but surely, I started to understand the basics of running a business. But the real turning point came when I decided to start my own side hustle. I didn't quit my job right away. I wasn't that brave. Instead, I figured I could test the waters while still holding on to the security of my paycheck. I'd always loved photography, so I decided to try my hand at selling custom prints online. At first, it was just for fun. I posted a few photos on Instagram and Etsy, and to my surprise, people started buying them. The thrill of making my first sale was intoxicating. I remember sitting in my cramped apartment, checking my phone, and seeing that someone had purchased a print. I felt a rush of excitement. This was real. I had just sold something that I had created. The validation was something I hadn't experienced in my 9-to-5 job, where I was just a cog in the machine. But selling prints online wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning. Over the next few months, I kept learning. I invested in better equipment, honed my photography skills, and started offering new products like digital downloads and photography workshops. Slowly, my side hustle began to grow. The extra income was nice, but the real payoff came from the freedom I felt. I was no longer dependent on my 9-to-5 job for validation or fulfillment. I had created something that was all mine. As my side hustle began to take off, I started to feel conflicted. I was making more money from my photography business than I was at my full-time job, but I was afraid to take the leap. I didn't want to give up the security of a steady paycheck, especially since the world of entrepreneurship felt so uncertain. What if it didn't work out? What if I failed? It wasn't until a mentor of mine, someone who had been through the entrepreneurial grind, pulled me aside and said, "You'll never know unless you try. Don't let fear of failure keep you from chasing what you truly want." That was the push I needed. I handed in my resignation a week later. I remember feeling a mix of excitement and terror as I clicked send on the email. My heart was pounding as I hit the send button, but the weight of that decision felt liberating. I had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my destiny. The first few months of full-time entrepreneurship were tough. I won't lie to you. There were days when I thought I had made a huge mistake. My income fluctuated. There were months when I made nothing and other months when I made more than I had in my corporate job. But I kept pushing forward. I knew that I couldn't go back to the life I had before. I had to make it work. It was during that period that I learned the true meaning of resilience. Entrepreneurship is not about having everything figured out from the start. It's about learning, failing, and getting back up. I failed more times than I can count, but each failure taught me something new. Whether it was a marketing strategy that didn't work or a product launch that fell flat, I learned to pivot and adapt. I learned that success is never linear. The real turning point for my business came when I stopped trying to follow the crowd. I had spent so much time in the beginning trying to copy what other successful entrepreneurs were doing. I thought that if I just mimicked their strategies, I would succeed too. But what I realized was that my success came when I embraced what made me unique. I wasn't just a photographer, I was a creator with a story to tell. I started sharing my journey more authentically, and that resonated with people. As my business grew, I hired my first employee. I was able to scale my operations, take on larger projects, and expand my product line. I still remember the first time I paid someone else to help with the workload. It was surreal. This was something I had never imagined would happen. Looking back now, I'm proud of how far I've come. My business is thriving, and I've created a life that's far more fulfilling than anything I could have imagined working for someone else. Entrepreneurship isn't easy, but it's worth it. And if there's one thing I've learned along the way, it's that you can't let fear hold you back. You won't know what you're capable of until you take the leap. So, if you're reading this and wondering whether you should take the plunge into entrepreneurship, I say go for it. Don't wait for the perfect moment. There is no such thing. The only way to truly know if it's for you is to try. Failure is a part of the process, but so is growth. And in the end, you'll never regret having tried. I've always been the type of person who liked to do things differently. Growing up in a small town, I wasn't exactly surrounded by entrepreneurs or big opportunities. But I had something that made me different, a relentless drive and a belief that I could do something bigger than just working the same dead-end jobs that most people in my town settled for. It all started with a simple idea. I was about 24 years old, fresh out of college, and had spent a few years working for a local tech company. I was making decent money for my age, but something was missing. I felt like I wasn't truly living up to my potential. I wanted to build something of my own. The only problem was, I had no idea where to start. One evening, I was sitting at my kitchen table, scrolling through social media, when I stumbled upon a post about a new app that was getting tons of attention. It was a delivery app for local businesses, kind of like Uber Eats, but more focused on smaller, independent shops. The idea stuck with me. I realized that the delivery business was booming, but it was still so fragmented. If I could figure out a way to bring more businesses under one roof and streamline the process, I could have a product that could potentially rival the big players. I decided to take a leap of faith and dive into the app development world. Now, let me tell you, I had absolutely no experience in coding or app development. None. My background was in business and marketing, which meant I could sell an idea, but couldn't build it. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I spent the next few months learning how to code. I downloaded every free online resource I could find and taught myself the basics. It was grueling work. I would stay up late, sacrificing sleep and socializing, just to learn a new programming language or to build a basic feature. There were days when I was ready to throw in the towel, but something inside me kept saying, "You can do this. Just a little longer." But as I started making progress, I realized I couldn't do it all alone. I needed a team. I needed developers, designers, and people who knew how to build something real. The problem was, I didn't have a budget. I couldn't afford to hire full-time staff, so I turned to the one resource I knew would be my ticket: freelancing websites. I spent hours posting job listings, reviewing portfolios, and negotiating with freelancers from around the world. I was looking for talent, people who could see the vision and who were willing to work with me for a fraction of what they'd normally charge. Eventually, I found a small team of developers from Eastern Europe and a designer in the Philippines who were willing to take a chance on me. Now, this is where the story gets interesting. Building an app from scratch is no small feat. It's not just about writing code. It's about creating something that people will actually want to use. But there was one thing that kept haunting me. How could I make my app stand out in a market already dominated by the likes of Uber Eats and DoorDash? I had to think outside the box. The big players were focusing on the obvious, offering fast delivery from well-known restaurants. But what if I could focus on a niche? What if I could help local, independent businesses that didn't have the resources to compete with the big chains? These small businesses were the heartbeat of communities, and I knew they'd appreciate the opportunity to have an online platform that could help them reach new customers. So, I pivoted my idea and turned it into something more community-focused. The app would connect people with local, independently owned shops, from bakeries and cafes to niche boutiques and home goods stores. It wasn't just about delivering food anymore. It was about supporting the local economy and giving these businesses a chance to thrive in an increasingly digital world. I remember the first time we launched the app in our test market, a small neighborhood in a nearby city. It was scary as hell. I wasn't sure if anyone would actually use it. But within the first few weeks, we started to see traction. We were able to partner with a handful of local businesses, and they quickly realized how much easier it was for them to reach customers. Word spread, and we started to get more sign-ups. I could feel the momentum building. However, things weren't as easy as they seemed. There were a lot of bumps along the way. The first major obstacle we faced was the app's user interface. It was clunky, confusing, and frankly, looked like it was built by someone who had just learned how to code, which, in a way, it was. We spent hours ironing out the bugs, getting feedback from users, and constantly updating the platform to make it more intuitive. Then there was the issue of funding. As a bootstrap startup, money was tight. Every penny had to be spent wisely. I would go to local investors, trying to convince them to back a small and proven business. Most of them turned me down, but I kept pushing, and eventually, I managed to secure a small investment from a local angel investor who believed in the vision. With that investment, we were able to scale up. We brought on more developers, improved the app's features, and expanded our marketing efforts. By the end of the first year, we had over 100 businesses using our platform, and we were getting close to breaking even. But we still had a long way to go. Fast forward to today, and the business is thriving. We're no longer just a small startup. We've expanded to multiple cities, formed partnerships with national brands, and brought on a full-time team of passionate individuals who believe in what we're building. We've grown exponentially, but we've also stayed true to our original vision, supporting small, local businesses and fostering a sense of community. Looking back, I can't believe how far we've come. There were so many times when I thought about giving up, when the pressure felt like it was going to crush me. But I'm glad I didn't quit. Entrepreneurship isn't easy. It's a roller coaster of highs and lows. But if you're willing to put in the work, learn from your mistakes, and stay focused on your vision, anything is possible. So, if you're out there thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple. Don't wait for the perfect moment. There will never be one. Start where you are, with what you have, and build from there. And most importantly, don't be afraid to fail. Because, trust me, you will fail many times. But it's those failures that will teach you the lessons you need to succeed. I've always been one of those people who believed that success was for others, not me. I grew up in a small town where opportunities were few and far between. My family didn't have a lot of money, but we were happy. My parents worked hard, and they instilled in me the idea that hard work would get you anywhere. But deep down, I always thought that hard work alone wasn't enough. There had to be something more. As a kid, I watched my parents struggle. My dad worked long hours in a factory, and my mom did odd jobs cleaning houses and taking care of the elderly. They were exhausted all the time, and no matter how hard they worked, we never seemed to get ahead. I remember feeling helpless when I saw my mom crying over bills she couldn't pay, or when my dad came home too tired to even eat dinner. By the time I was in high school, I started dreaming of a different life. I knew I didn't want to work in a factory like my dad, and I definitely didn't want to spend my days cleaning other people's homes like my mom. But I also knew that to get ahead, I'd need more than just dreams. I needed a plan. So, I threw myself into my studies. I wasn't the smartest kid in school, but I had a lot of drive. I spent countless hours after class studying, trying to get ahead. I took every opportunity to get involved in extracurricular activities and leadership roles. It wasn't just about grades for me. I wanted to prove to myself and to others that I could do something bigger. After high school, I managed to get a scholarship to a state university. It wasn't a full ride, but it was enough to cover the majority of my tuition. I studied business, knowing that if I wanted to build something of my own, I would need to understand how businesses worked. College was a wake-up call for me. I realized how little I actually knew about the world. The kids around me came from families that could afford to send them to top schools, and they had access to resources I could only dream of. But instead of feeling out of place, I became even more determined. During my sophomore year, I took an internship with a small startup that focused on tech innovation. I wasn't making much money, but the experience was invaluable. The founder of the startup, Jason, was a self-made millionaire in his early 30s. I would watch him every day, fascinated by his energy, his focus, and his ability to solve problems that seemed impossible. Jason didn't come from wealth either. In fact, he grew up in a neighborhood much like mine. But he had a different mindset, one that was laser-focused on opportunities rather than limitations. One day, I asked him how he managed to stay so motivated. He looked at me with a grin and said, "The key is to never stop looking for problems to solve. And when you find one, don't wait for someone else to fix it. You fix it." That advice stuck with me. I realized that the real key to entrepreneurship wasn't about having money or connections. It was about having the mindset to see problems as opportunities and the determination to turn them into solutions. After graduating, I worked for a few more companies, but the itch to start my own business was always there. I saved up every penny I could, living frugally, and finally, after 5 years of working for others, I was ready to take the leap. I had an idea for an app that would simplify how people manage their personal finances. I knew the concept wasn't new, but I believed there was a better way to do it, a way that would be more user-friendly and more accessible to people who didn't have a financial background. I used the last of my savings to develop a prototype and hire a small team. It was a risk, but I was all in. I spent every waking moment working on the app, testing it, tweaking it, and refining it. The first few months were tough. We had no users, no feedback, and no traction. The nights felt long, and the doubts crept in. I wondered if I was just another guy with a good idea who couldn't execute it. Then, one day, we got our first break. A popular tech blog picked up our story, and suddenly, we had users. Not many, but enough to keep going. With each user that signed up, we learned more about what worked and what didn't. Slowly, we started improving the app, adding new features, and listening to our users. The app didn't become an overnight success, but it started to gain traction. Over the next couple of years, we raised some seed money, hired more people, and refined our product. We faced challenges, of course. There were times when we thought we might go under. We had technical issues, and competitors started popping up, trying to replicate what we were doing. But each time we faced a setback, I remembered Jason's advice: find the problem and fix it. In 2021, after almost 4 years of hard work, we hit a milestone. We crossed 1 million users. It wasn't the end, but it was a huge achievement for a small startup like ours. With that success came more opportunities. Investors took notice, and we secured additional funding to expand our team and scale the product. Fast forward to 2025, and we're now one of the top personal finance apps in the market. We have millions of users, a growing team, and partnerships with major financial institutions. It hasn't been easy. There have been countless sleepless nights, doubts, and sacrifices. But looking back, I wouldn't trade the journey for anything. I've learned so much along the way. The most important lesson, though, is this: success doesn't happen overnight. It's not about luck or timing. It's about perseverance, learning from failure, and having the courage to take risks. Entrepreneurship is messy, hard work, but it's also incredibly rewarding. If you have a vision and the determination to see it through, anything is possible. Now, when I think about my parents and the struggles they went through, I can't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. They taught me the value of hard work. But more than that, they taught me the importance of never giving up. They were my first role models, even if they didn't realize it at the time. And that's what keeps me going now. There's no magic formula for success. But if you keep pushing forward, if you keep looking for problems to solve, you'll eventually get where you want to go. So, if you're thinking about starting your own business or chasing a dream, my advice to you is simple: don't wait for the perfect moment. There's no such thing. Just start. And when things get tough, and they will, keep going. The road to success is never straight, but it's always worth it. I was 24 when I started my first business, a small online store that sold custom t-shirts. It wasn't some grand idea. In fact, it was a solution to a problem that many of my friends and I had: finding cool, personalized shirts that didn't cost an arm and a leg. But what started as a side hustle to pay my student loans quickly turned into something much bigger than I could have ever imagined. Let me back up a bit. I grew up in a small town in Michigan where my parents owned a local hardware store. I spent my entire childhood running around the aisles, organizing shelves, and watching my parents hustle every day. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they made a comfortable living, and there was always a roof over our heads. The one thing I always noticed was how hard my parents worked and how they never seemed to take a vacation. They didn't seem to enjoy what they did anymore. They just worked to survive. In high school, I remember sitting in the back of my biology class, staring out the window and daydreaming about running my own business one day. The idea of creating something from scratch, the freedom, the autonomy, it seemed so far away at the time. I wasn't a brilliant student, but I always had an entrepreneurial itch that I couldn't quite scratch. I'd sell snacks to my classmates or offer to do their homework for a couple of bucks, not because I had a passion for the work, but because I liked the idea of being my own boss, even if I didn't fully understand what that meant. After high school, I went off to college, where I was quickly hit with the realities of debt. The weight of student loans was crushing, and while I had dreams of running a business, they always felt out of reach. I tried to focus on my studies and marketing, thinking that it might help me get a corporate job that would pay off my loans faster, but my mind was always wandering. I started experimenting with side gigs, selling old books, clothes, anything I could find around my apartment on eBay or Craigslist. It wasn't much, but it was something. One night, I was having a beer with some friends when the conversation turned to shirts. More specifically, custom shirts, unique, funny designs that we could wear at concerts, parties, or just as a way to stand out. Everyone in the group had an opinion on what would make the perfect design. I remember thinking, why not just make them ourselves? So, after that conversation, I got the idea to create an online store that offered custom-designed t-shirts. I didn't know anything about printing shirts or running a business, but I figured I'd figure it out as I went along. I spent the next few weeks reading blogs, watching YouTube videos, and researching suppliers who could print shirts on demand. I chose a print-on-demand service because it allowed me to start small without investing in inventory up front. I spent $500 on a website, set up a basic Shopify store, and started designing shirts late into the night after my classes. The designs were simple, some funny quotes, pop culture references, and a couple of original graphics I had drawn myself. I launched the store with no expectations. In fact, I honestly didn't think anyone would buy anything. I didn't have a huge following on social media, and my marketing skills were non-existent. I was just a broke college student hoping to make a few bucks. But to my surprise, I got my first order within a couple of days. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, a few more orders trickled in, and I started to think maybe this could be something. But then, as quickly as it started, the orders stopped. I was stuck. I realized that if I wanted my business to succeed, I needed to learn how to market it. I couldn't just rely on word of mouth. So, I threw myself into learning everything I could about digital marketing, Facebook ads, Instagram, Google ads, SEO, and email marketing. I spent hours on YouTube and reading blog posts from other entrepreneurs who had succeeded in e-commerce. It wasn't glamorous, and I failed a lot, but I kept pushing forward. One of my biggest breakthroughs came when I started running targeted ads on Facebook. I created custom ads with my t-shirt designs, specifically aimed at niche audiences, people who loved certain TV shows or sports teams, for example. I tested dozens of ad variations, tweaking the designs, the copy, and the targeting until I found a combination that worked. I remember the first time I saw a return on investment, $100 spent on ads and $500 in sales. It felt like magic. That was the moment I knew I could turn this thing into a real business. Over the next year, I worked tirelessly to grow my online store. I had no social life and barely any free time, but I didn't mind. Every sale, every customer review, every successful ad campaign felt like a small victory. I started hiring part-time help to handle customer service, and I spent more time designing new shirts and refining my brand. I also began to expand my product line, adding hoodies, mugs, and phone cases. But scaling my business wasn't easy. As my sales grew, so did the challenges. Managing customer expectations, dealing with shipping delays, handling returns, and ensuring quality control became overwhelming. At times, it felt like the business was running me, not the other way around. I had to hire additional employees, and while that helped, it also brought its own set of problems, such as managing a team, payroll, and compliance issues. Despite the challenges, my revenue continued to grow. By the time I graduated college, my store was generating 6 figures in revenue, and I had just signed a lease for a small warehouse to store inventory. It wasn't easy. There were many sleepless nights and moments of self-doubt, but I had finally built something that was profitable, scalable, and sustainable. Now, at 30 years old, I have a team of 25 people, and my business generates 7 figures annually. We've expanded into several other niches, and we're even considering international expansion. I've learned so much along the way, not just about business, but about myself. Starting a business isn't a straight line. There are peaks, valleys, and moments when you feel like giving up. But if you stick with it, learn from your mistakes, and adapt, you can create something that lasts. Looking back, I never would have imagined that the simple idea of selling t-shirts to pay off student loans would turn into the company I run today. I still remember how terrified I was when I made the decision to take that first step, but now I can't imagine doing anything else. Entrepreneurship has taught me that the journey is just as important as the destination, and that if you work hard enough, the destination will come. I started my business with nothing but a dream, a laptop, and an unrelenting belief that I could make it. It's funny looking back at where I am now, successful, running a company with a solid customer base and a growing team. But it wasn't always like that. I had no idea what I was doing when I first started. It all began back in 2017. I was fresh out of college, working an office job in a cubicle that I hated. The pay wasn't great, and I had zero passion for the work. I would sit at my desk for 8 hours a day, counting the minutes until I could leave. I had big dreams, though. I wanted to build something that mattered. I wanted to be my own boss. But the reality of student loan debt and the fear of failure kept me stuck in that 9 to 5 grind. One day, I came across a post on Reddit about someone who started their own online business selling a niche product. I remember reading the post and thinking, if they can do it, why can't I? I started researching everything I could about online businesses, e-commerce, digital marketing, and entrepreneurship. I devoured content, YouTube videos, blog posts, forums, anything I could get my hands on. But I quickly realized there was a massive gap between theory and practice. Everyone talks about how easy it is to start a business, but no one talks about the hundreds of hours of trial and error, the sacrifices, the failures. Everyone made it look so easy, but I was about to find out that it wasn't. The first step was figuring out what I wanted to sell. I had no background in retail, no experience in product development, and definitely no access to capital. But I had a passion for fitness and health, so I figured I would start there. I decided to create an online store selling eco-friendly fitness products, like water bottles, yoga mats, and resistance bands. I chose this niche because I noticed that people were becoming more conscious of sustainability, and there was a growing market for eco-friendly products. I didn't have much money to start, So I decided to bootstrap everything. I created a website using Shopify, spent countless nights designing the layout and writing product descriptions, and set up social media accounts to start building a brand. I couldn't afford professional photography, so I used my phone to take pictures of my products. Everything looked amateur at best, but I figured it was a start. Then came the hard part, driving traffic to my website. I had no marketing budget. The thought of spending money on ads seemed like a huge risk, so I started posting on Facebook groups, Reddit forums, and Instagram pages related to fitness. I reached out to fitness influencers, offering them free products in exchange for posts. I created blog content and tried to build an email list. But for months, nothing really took off. I wasn't making enough sales to cover my expenses, and I was starting to feel like I had made a huge mistake. There were days when I'd wake up and see that the only thing in my inbox was spam. No new sales. No customer inquiries. Just the usual junk. The self-doubt crept in. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. Maybe I had misunderstood everything. But deep down, I knew I couldn't give up. Not yet. It wasn't until about 6 months in that things started to turn around. I'd been experimenting with paid ads on Facebook, and while they didn't work at first, I learned from my mistakes. I started to understand what my audience responded to and tweaked my targeting. I also rebranded my business, giving it a more professional look with a new logo and packaging. I focused heavily on customer experience, quick shipping, excellent customer service, and engaging with my followers on social media. It was a slow burn, but over time, sales started to trickle in. I was still working full-time at my day job, but now I had a steady stream of income from my side business. I took every extra penny I made and reinvested it into growing the business. I hired a freelance designer to help with branding and website updates. I outsourced customer service so I could focus on marketing. I even took courses on digital marketing to improve my skills. As the months went by, my business started to gain more traction. Word of mouth spread, and customers started sharing their experiences on social media. I began seeing organic growth from my efforts, and the more I put into the business, the more it paid off. But just when I thought I was getting the hang of it, disaster struck. One day, I got a call from my supplier. They were shutting down their operations, and all my stock was going to be delayed for at least 3 months. I was devastated. I had built up an inventory, but now I had nothing to sell. I had customers waiting for their products, and I had no way of fulfilling the orders. I remember feeling completely overwhelmed. This was the moment I almost quit. I thought about walking away, going back to my boring office job, and just pretending like this never happened. But then I thought about the progress I'd made. I thought about the emails from happy customers and the people who told me how my products helped them on their fitness journey. That was the spark I needed to push forward. I scrambled to find a new supplier, and thankfully, I found a reliable one who could get me the products I needed. It took some time to rebuild trust with my customers, but I offered discounts and refunds for those who had been affected by the delay. I made sure to keep them updated every step of the way. Slowly but surely, the business recovered. The experience taught me a valuable lesson. Never take things for granted. Every day, I was learning and evolving, and so was the business. I realized that setbacks were inevitable, but they didn't have to define me. The key was resilience. Fast forward to today. My business is no longer just a side hustle. It's a full-fledged company with a team of 5 people. We've expanded our product line, launched a subscription service, and partnered with major influencers in the fitness space. My income now exceeds what I used to make at my day job, and I'm able to work from anywhere. I've traveled to several countries, attended industry conferences, and even got featured in a few major publications. But the journey hasn't been easy. There have been moments of extreme stress, times when I thought I was out of my depth. But every challenge I've faced made me stronger. Entrepreneurship is not glamorous. It's full of late nights, stress, and constant hustle. But when you're building something you believe in, the hard work is worth it. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that failure isn't the end. It's just a stepping stone on the way to success. When you're down, it's easy to feel like it's all over, but persistence is what makes the difference. If you're willing to learn from your mistakes, adapt, and keep pushing forward, you can make your dreams a reality. So to anyone out there thinking about starting a business or chasing their dream, just do it. The road will be tough, and it will take time, but if you're committed, you'll get there. I know because I did. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.